regards to medical records requests, how much you can charge, how fast do you have to turn that around, what do the forms look like, and things along those lines, as well as how can you communicate via email, text, etc. Today we're actually going to talk about some of those medical records requests and HIPAA, and two very, very different forms and what the key components are to help you understand exactly what the situation you may find yourself in and how to respond. Now, first of all, is the two major differences that you're going to find in forms that you're going to receive for medical records requests. Is one is going to be a HIPAA authorization, and the other one is going to be a right of access. And typically, what you're going to find is third-party requests are going to come as a HIPAA authorization, not every time, but many times, and then patient requests are really a right of access. Although they are very similar, there are distinct differences that actually matter. So if you get something from someone and it appears like it is from the patient, and it has three key components. One being indicates that they're exercising their right of access, and then also it is in writing, obviously, because you received it, and then it is signed and dated, as well as it clearly identifies the designated person and where to send the protected health information. That is a right of access request. It's very similar to if the patient were to come in and just ask to get a copy of their medical records. At that stage, then everything is handled under the right of access, which is different than being handled under the HIPAA authorization. The right of access changes the game quite a bit because a patient can ask for things in very specific format. You have a tight deadline. You have to get it done within 30 days, and really, HIPAA expects you to get it done more quickly than that as well, but the legal requirement is 30 days, and then also cost, and we've covered the cost of a right of access request in a different video last October, and that's very limited as well. Then we get to the HIPAA authorization, and that a lot of times is going to come from most third parties that are requesting medical records, and in those cases then, in a HIPAA authorization, the whole game changes. The form has to have some very specific requirements. It's got to have a description of who's authorized to make the disclosure, and then also those who to receive the protected health information. It's got to be a specific and meaningful description of the protected health information that they're requesting. There has to be a description of the purpose for the disclosure. Why are you giving them over the information? There's got to be an expiration date or an event that marks the end of it. There's got to be a signature by the individual and the date. There's got to be information concerning their right to revoke, and this is important. They have to indicate on the form that they have a right to revoke that, and it's really for the patient. It's kind of a weird addition, but that's also a requirement on the HIPAA authorization. And then the last is it's got to have information about the ability or inability to condition treatment, payment, enrollment, or eligibility benefits on the authorization. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of different things that are going on the HIPAA authorization. In fact, many times you'll see those forms, they're full one-page forms, where the right of access is typically much shorter because it doesn't have to have a lot. It can just simply request the medical records or what medical records that they're actually requesting, but it can even be wide open and say all of them. It's going to be signed by the patient and dated by the patient, and they're going to indicate who to send it from. But typically that letter is going to come from the patient, or it's going to be appear as if it comes from the patient, although we're seeing more and more attorneys who actually utilize that form in order to get the discounted rates. And again, there's significant differences. Now, if it's coming as just a HIPAA authorization, really, your compliance and turning over those medical records is a bit more optional. In fact, there's no deadline, and the only limitation on the copy fees is what is limited in the state of Illinois for you. And so that's when the state limits it. On the right of access, though, there's a more specific limitation on the costs that, again, are discussed in a different video. And the really important difference in these two things is the right of access is really coming from the patient. Even though the records may be going to a designated representative, somebody who they're asking you to send them to, the request is really coming from the patient. The other is typically coming from a third party, but has to have all of those components. So pay attention to that. And sometimes, again, you'll get a letter that is coming from an attorney, but it looks like the letter is really written as if it's coming from the patient, signed by the patient, dated by the patient, and indicating that it is a right of access request. Those are the two big differences in those two forms, and hopefully this will help you out in some of your determinations on how to handle medical records requests under HIPAA, and we'll catch you next week.